I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, throughout our Senate history, we've had senators like Senator Levin, and before he did depart, I want to thank him for his principled approach to this complex issue, and just would share with all of our colleagues that he's completing his service in the Senate this year. He's not running for re-election, and would certainly have been re-elected. But I was this weekend at a conference of national security conference at the Reagan Library, and the first winners of an award for national security were former Secretary of Defense Gates, who served 2 presidents, and Senator Levin was the other winner of that. And I think it's a tribute to his commitment to this country. We've disagreed on a lot of issues, and no one should think he's not a strong and effective advocate for values around here, but I think all of us should listen to his remarks. And his warning, it's a very simple warning. That warning is that if a majority can change the rules with a simple majority vote in order to defeat what heretofore was a right of a minority party in the Senate, there are no minority rights left. They simply exist at the will of the majority. This is a fundamental matter. It's an important matter. And we've had some close calls and a lot of intensity, but we've avoided this kind of action. I think it's fair to say without dispute that the significance of this rule change today dwarfs any other appeal of the ruling of the chair that we've seen maybe in the history of the Republic. Certainly, maybe in the history of the Republic. This is a big event, and it changes what goes on here. Because we deal with power and the exercise of power. And this whole thing is simply Majority Leader Reid. And he's got a difficult job, and I've tried to not make his life more difficult than it needs to be. But he's not a dictator. He does not get to dictate how this Senate is operated. He does not have the right to come in and change the rules because he wants to fill 3 judgeship slots that are not needed. No way close. There is no way you can justify filling these court slots as based on simple need, caseload per judge. So he's unhappy about that. Maybe he wants to change the mood of the country from Obamacare and the overreach that was executed here to pass that bill on December 24th, to ram it through the Senate on a straight party line vote. I suspect that's part of it. But this is not the way to do business here. The only reason those judges were blocked, the only reason they did not get a confirmation was because we didn't need them. This country is going broke. There are districts in America that need judges. The 10th Circuit, the D.C. Circuit does not need more judges. It doesn't need the 8 they have. Yes, they have 3 vacancies, but with the current 8 judges, their average caseload per judge was 149, and they've been continuing to drop. My circuit, the 11th Circuit, Madam President, you'd be interested to know, has an average caseload per judge of 740. The next lowest caseload per circuit is twice 149. The average is well above that per circuit, well above twice that. The judges themselves say they don't need any more judges. They take the whole summer off. These judges would not have been rejected if we'd needed them, but the President so determined to try to leave a legacy of friends on that court that he just shoved them anyway. and demanded that the Senate pass them. And Senator Reid demanded that we confirm these judges. The judges say they don't need any more judges on that court. They don't need them, whether they say they need them or not. I know how to look at the caseloads. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. I'm on the Court Subcommittee. I've chaired it and been ranking member of it for years. I know how to do weighted caseloads. There is no justification for filling a single slot on that court. And we shouldn't be doing it. I'm also ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, and I know we can't keep throwing money away for no good reason. The last thing we do should be asking the American people to fund $1 million a year judge. That's what the judge and their staff are estimated to cost. 3 of them. It's like burning every year $1 million on the mall. We don't have $1 million to throw away. But we do have judges, we do have circuits, we do have district courts around the country that are overloaded. And we're going to add some judges to them. And we ought to close these judges and move that judge there, like any common sense person would do. So it wasn't any animosity to any of the nominations and the character of their character or decency that led to this rejection. It was because we warned against it. Senator Grassley and I serve on this committee. He previously chaired the Court Subcommittee. And Senator Grassley and I blocked President Bush for filling one of the slots. Oh, they wanted to fill the slot. They thought it might leave a legacy judge that would be influential to them. And that's what they suggested. But we refused. And we were actually able to transfer one of those slots to the Ninth Circuit. And that's what good business should be done around here. But we certainly are at a point where we don't need to fill that slot. And it should in no way cause the majority leader, Senator Reid, to feel like his power was threatened. His majority was threatened. We're going to change the rules of the Senate. Change the rules of the Senate so he can get 3 judges confirmed we do not need. And I'll be prepared to debate that issue anywhere, anytime, on the merits. Not one of those slots should be filled. Not one of them. It is the lowest caseload per judge circuit in America, and they do not have such complex cases that slows down their work and demands more judges. That's been analyzed, and it's not true. Well, Senator Reid asked for this job. That's what my wife says to me. When I complain, don't blame me, you ask for the job. So he asked to be Majority Leader of the United States Senate. And it's not easy. You've got lots of members. You've got lots of different ideas about what ought to be done. And Trent Lott called it herding cats. I suppose that's a pretty good description of it. He said one time it's like putting a bunch of frogs in the wheelbarrow. You put one in, 2 jump out. So it's not easy to move the Senate. I understand that. But changing the rules, as Senator Levin said, by a simple majority vote to significantly alter the tradition of the Senate is a dangerous thing. Senator Reid says we've been wasting time on the procedural hurdles thrown up in the Senate. He said Congress is broken, and American people think the Congress is broken. Well, I think it was broken when they used legislative legerdemain on December 24th, before Scott Brown from Massachusetts could take office, to pass an immigration bill that pass a health care bill that the American people overwhelmingly opposed. Maybe the American people, part of their frustration with the Congress is that they passed a bill without a single Republican vote in the House or the Senate, rammed it through that the American people opposed, Maybe that's why the American people are not happy with us around here. But let me explain, colleagues, what it is that's causing the greatest frustration in the Senate. It's a trend that began some years ago, not long after I came to the Senate 17 years ago, and it's just accelerated. And it's reached a pace on the Majority Leader Reid we've never, ever seen before. And it undermines the very integrity and tradition of the Senate. And it's got to stop. And we've got to recover the tradition of this body. We owe it to those who will be filling these seats years to come. And this is the problem. A maneuver was discovered called filling the tree, a parliamentary maneuver that the majority leader who gets recognition first in the Senate seeks recognition, and then he fills the tree, and the parliamentary maneuver basically blocks anyone else from getting an amendment. You can't get your amendment up. So how do we have an amendment? Well, you have to go hand in hand to Senator Reid and say, Senator Reid, I'd like an amendment. Well, I don't think so. I don't like that amendment. But I like it. I want to vote on it. Sorry. We don't want to vote on that. And this is the way it goes. And it's been going every year. This defense bill that commonly had 30 or more amendments of substance, when it hit the floor, it's $500 billion. The biggest appropriations bill we have, $500 billion. Senator Coburn has an amendment that would save us some money, directly related to the Defense Department. Senator Reid won't give him a vote on that. People say, why don't you do something, Sessions? Why don't you get an amendment passed? You can't get it brought up unless he agrees. And he says it's because of delay. He says it's because that it creates time difficulties. But we've been a week on this bill. We haven't had but 2 votes. We've gone days with no votes. It's not time. Let me tell you what it is. The majority leader of the United States Senate is protecting his members from tough votes. He does not want them to have to cast votes on critical issues in this country. And he is not time. It's not delay. There's plenty of time. We could have cast 15 votes already on this bill and wouldn't have many left, and everybody would be satisfied. And that's the way it was when Senator McConnell came here. That's the way it's been. That's the way it was when I came here. We had 60-something votes on a bankruptcy bill. It went on 3 weeks. So this is causing tension. This is causing frustration. And one of our new members to the Senate, when we were debating this very question some months ago, said, well, they tell us we have to get Senator McConnell's permission before they'll let us get an amendment. And I said, wait a minute. Do you not understand that you are a duly elected senator from a state of America, and you have to ask permission of the Republican leader before you can get a vote on an amendment? I mean, how did this happen? So this is a background issue that we have that's undermining collegiality in this body. I'm tired of asking the majority leader for permission to give me a vote in the United States Senate. It's not right.
With the Senator yield?
Yes.
I'd just like to point
Senator
out.
Kansas, I yield for question.
I'd just like to point out, I'm assuming that his situation is very similar to the situation that I find myself in. About a year ago, we had a farm bill up. I was the ranking member of the committee. We voted 73 times. We had over 300 offered. As amendments came forth, and the First Amendment had nothing to do with agriculture, basically, we got through it in 2.5 days. Now, move ahead to this year's farm bill. I think there were 10 votes. Senator Thune has been on the committee for a long time. We respect his voice and we respect his amendments. He had about 4. Senator Grassley's been on the committee for a lot longer. He's always got amendments on the Farm Bill. Senator Johans is a former Secretary of Agriculture. Excellent senator, excellent representative for Nebraska and a real voice for agriculture. He had several amendments. Personally, I had about 2 or 3 amendments I would have liked to have been considered, and the reason I'm mentioning them is that we all agreed to hold off on committee if we could raise them on the floor, because we wanted to expedite it because the big issue was time. Well, we don't have time for a farm bill. Usually farm bills take a week or 2 weeks. That's not the case anymore. We did it 2.5 days yesterday, or last year. This year, we were expecting to have votes. None of us got amendments. After 10, maybe 7, I think it was 10 votes, bingo, it was cut off. And the majority leader controlled the effort. This is like the House. This is like the Rules Committee. I remember when I was in the House. I remember we had a Robert Stenholm amendment.
Well, in the House, Senator Roberts, you can't get an amendment voted on unless approved by the Rules Committee?
That is correct. And we
that is the difference in the House and the Senate, isn't it?
If I could respond to the distinguished senator, we had a Robert Stenholm amendment at that point while we were in the minority, the Republicans, and Charlie Stenholm was the Democrat, and as we went in, he whispered to me, he says, you might want to make this the Stenholm-Roberts amendment. And I figured that out, pretty fast, and we got our amendment made in order. I thought that the Rules Committee, as a younger member of the House at that particular time, was based on the merits, whether it was germane, whether it was pertinent, et cetera. It wasn't. It was just a complete rehash of what went on with the committee, with the authorizing committee. So one of the reasons I decided to come to the Senate was that you can offer an amendment at any time on any subject, unless it was something involving national security or whatever. I understand that. But now what we have is a one-man Rules Committee. And I deeply resent that. I just think that, and I feel so sorry for the Senate, and I feel sorry for the members who come here and are not able to have their amendments considered. One of the first things I did as the ranking member of the Senate Agriculture Committee last year was to promise a lot of people on our side that had never had the opportunity to offer an amendment before. I said, you will, if I can get this thing done. And we did. We opened it up, and it was one of the few bills that went under regular order, and we got things done. Now there's only one House. There's the House, and there's the Senate, just like the House. And that's a shame. And I thank the distinguished senator for his comments.
I thank the senator so very much. His insight is correct. So I'll wrap right up and say what happened today is a very, very significant and sad day. It represents the greatest alteration of the rules without a proper procedure that we've probably seen in the history of the Republic. It erodes legitimate minority rights in a way that subjects every right a minority party has in the Senate and right any individual senator has in the Senate, places that at great risk so that at any time the majority can do that. And that's what was so eloquently explained, Senator Alexander, by Senator Levin just a few moments ago. I was so impressed with his analysis. So we'll wrestle through this and work at it. I know Senator Alexander has worked hard in every way possible to avoid this day. He has expressed great interest in it, and I look forward to hearing his comments at this time on where we are and what's going to happen to us. I thank you, Senator Alexander, and I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Madam President, I thank the senator from Alabama for his thoughtfulness and his leadership and his reminding the Senate that, as Senator Byrd used to say to us, that the purpose of the United States Senate is to be a place where there can be an opportunity for unlimited discussion and unlimited debate and unlimited amendment. That's why we're here. And as Senator Byrd used to say so eloquently, that it was the unique body in the world because it provided the necessary fence, Senator Byrd said in his last speech to this Senate when he spoke before the Rules Committee, the necessary fence against abuses of the executive, remembering how the This country was founded in opposition to the king and the popular excesses. That was what the Senate is supposed to be. And, Madam President, I'm afraid that ended today. That ended today. This action by the Democratic majority today is the most important and most dangerous restructuring of the rules of the United States Senate since Thomas Jefferson wrote the rules at the founding of our country. It creates the perpetual opportunity for the danger that Alexis de Tocqueville described, that he thought most dangerous for our country when he came to our country to visit in the 1830s. The young Frenchman said, he said, I see two great dangers for this new American democracy. One was Russia, and one, he said, is the tyranny of the majority. This action today creates a perpetual opportunity for the tyranny of the majority because it permits a majority in this body to do whatever it wants to do anytime it wants to do it. This should be called Obamacare 2 because it is another example of the use of raw partisan political power for the majority to do whatever it wants to do anytime it wants to do it. And in this case, what it wants to do is to implement the President's radical regulatory agenda through the District of Columbia Court. That's what this is. It's not about a filibuster. The filibuster rules were the subject of the dispute, but it was how the rule was changed. How the rule was changed. It's a big football weekend in Tennessee. Vanderbilt University plays the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Next week, Alabama plays at Auburn, or maybe that's this week. Big football games coming up. Let's imagine this. Let's say at the Vanderbilt-Tennessee game, which is being played in Knoxville, home of the University of Tennessee, Vanderbilt gets on the 1-yard line. And the University of Tennessee says, well, you know, we're the home team, so we'll just add 20 yards to the field or whatever it takes for us to win the game. Or the Boston Red Sox playing at home. Let's say they're behind the Cardinals this year. And they get to the 9th inning, they're behind, and they say, well, it's our home field. We'll just add a few innings or whatever it takes so we can win the game. That's what the Democratic majority did today. They said the rules don't allow us to do what we want to do. So we'll just change the rules to do whatever it takes to get the result we want. That's what they did with Obamacare. We remember that. I was standing right here at this desk. It was snowing. It was the middle of the winter. Senators were coming in the middle of the night. And what happened? Among the things that the American people liked the least about Obamacare was that it was crammed down the throat of the American people by the raw exercise of partisan political power with not one single Republican vote. It's not the way the Civil Rights Bill was passed, not the way Social Security and other great bills were passed. They were passed by a bipartisan majority so that we could gain the support of the American people. But our Democratic majority must have liked that Obamacare night. The American people aren't liking it so much because apparently nobody read the bill very closely. And we have millions of Americans who have their policies canceled. We're going to have millions more when employers start looking at the cost of Obamacare. This is Obamacare 2, Madam President. This is another exercise of raw partisan political power for the Democratic majority to get the result it wants, and there's only one cure for it, and that is an election. An election is coming up in about a year. The American people can speak. And in the meantime, this has been the most dangerous, most important restructuring of the United States Senate since Thomas Jefferson wrote the rules. It is, according to the senator from Nevada who is the majority leader, it is, according to his book in 2006, the end of the United States Senate. That's what he said this would be, and now he has done it. He has written the end of the United States Senate by his actions today. The senator from Michigan, Senator Levin, said to all of us when we were discussing this earlier this year, he reminded us of the great senator from Michigan, Arthur Vandenberg, who was the author of the idea of a bipartisan foreign policy. Senator Vandenberg said shortly after World War II that a United States Senate with a majority in which a majority can change the rules anytime the majority wants is a United States Senate without any rules. May I say that again? A United States Senate in which the majority can change the rules anytime the majority wants is a United States Senate without any rules. So this is not about the filibuster. This is another raw, partisan, political power grab so the Democratic majority can do whatever it wants to do whenever it wants to do it. It is Obamacare 2, and the American people will see it that way when they take time, when they can take time from their websites trying to fill out their new insurance policies to pay enough attention to it. Now, what is the excuse for this extraordinarily disturbing action today? It is the flimsiest of excuses, Madam President, and I want to take a few minutes and outline what those are. The first allegation was that the Republican minority was using the filibuster to keep President Obama's appointees from gaining their seats. Well, let's look at the history from the Congressional Research Service. So how many Supreme Court nominees have ever been failed to be seated because of a failed cloture vote? That's a filibuster. The answer is 0 in the history of the Senate. Not just President Obama, but the history of the Senate. Now, someone might point to the Abe Fortas case when President Johnson, I guess it was in the late 1960s, engineered a 47-46 cloture vote so, in Johnson's words, Abe Fortas could hold his head up. But in fact, the filibuster has never been used to deny a Supreme Court justice his or her seat. How many cabinet members of President Obama have been denied their seat by a filibuster? 0, Madam President. This is the Congressional Research Service. Now, the majority leader said, well, what about Secretary Hagel, the distinguished defense secretary? He had to wait 34 days to be confirmed. Why shouldn't he wait 34 days to be confirmed? He was confirmed shortly after his name was reported here. We had a perfectly adequate Secretary of Defense sitting in the office at the time, Secretary Panetta. I remember the senator from Nevada standing over there asking, what if we're attacked? And Secretary Hagel's not there. Well, Secretary Panetta was there. The number is 0.
Would the senator yield for a unanimous consent request? I ask unanimous consent that after the senators from Tennessee's remarks that we hear from the senator from Arkansas, Senator Pryor, and that I be recognized after Senator Pryor for such time as I may consume.
Is there objection?
And if the senator from Oklahoma needs to speak now, I'll be glad to. Thank you.
Without objection.
Let me go. Remember, my point was that the charge is that Republicans had been denying President Obama his nominations by filibuster. Not on the Supreme Court, not to his cabinet, and no district judges, Madam President. How many in the history of the country have ever been denied their seats by failed cloture vote, including President Obama? The answer is 0. Now, that's very interesting. So what is the reason for this? Well, let's go on. Maybe it was some other nomination that caused such a problem that would justify this dangerous restructuring of the Senate rules. Let's go to the sub-cabinet. These are all the executive appointments below the cabinet level. How many of those have been denied? Under President Clinton, the Senate rejected 2 nominees of his by a cloture vote. Under President George W. Bush, it was 3. Under President Obama, it has been 2. So, Madam President, in the history of the United States Senate, the cloture vote has been used to deny 7 presidential nominees their seat, and President Obama 2. Well, let's go to the one area where there has been a little bit more, and that is the circuit judges. Now, remember, on the Supreme Court, never. District judges, never. Cabinet member, never. But circuit judge, yes. There have been 10 instances where presidential nominees for the federal circuit courts of appeal have been denied their seats because of a failed cloture vote. That is a filibuster. 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Well, how did this happen? If in all these other areas there it never happens, why did it happen there? Because, as the Republican leader spoke this morning, Democrats got together in 2003, the year I came to the Senate, and said, for the first time in the history of the United States Senate, we're going to use the filibuster to deny President George W. Bush 10 nominations to the circuit court because they're too conservative, not because they're not qualified. One was Miguel Estrada, one of the most highly qualified nominees ever presented. One was Judge Pickering. One was Judge Pryor, who used to be a law clerk to Judge Wisdom, as I once was. And I know the high respect that Judge Wisdom had for him. So the end result was that we had this gang of 14, and the Democrats ended up only stopping 5 of President Bush's judges. But that was the first time in the history of the Senate, and to date, including the judges that we're discussing now, the 3 on the D.C. Circuit Court, the total is 5. So that is it, Mr. President, Madam President. I mean, how can one say that President Obama has not been treated fairly when, in fact, the answer is 0 on Supreme Court, 0 on district judges, 0 on cabinet, and the same 2 on subcabinet, and the same on circuit courts that President Bush had. I asked the Senate historian if President Obama's cabinet nominees had been moved through the Senate more swiftly or slower than those of his 2 predecessors, Bush and Clinton. The Senate historian told me it was about the same. So on that question, that's a fake crisis. Now, the second allegation was that it takes too long for President Obama's nominees to come through the Senate. Well, Madam President, we have something on our desk called the executive calendar. Every senator has this. There are 44 senators in their first term, and maybe some haven't had a chance to read it very carefully. But it has on it all of the names of everyone who could possibly be confirmed. The way the Senate procedure works, you come out of a committee to the executive calendar. Now, let me state the obvious. All of the committees are controlled by the Democrats. So if we want to report someone for the National Labor Relations Board, it has to be approved by a majority of Democrats on the committee on which I serve. So you get on this calendar by a majority of Democrat votes. So how long have the people on the calendar been waiting? Well, 54 of them have been waiting only 3 weeks. In other words, they just got there. Most of them aren't controversial. Usually they're approved on a day like this when we're wrapping up before we go home for a week or 2. So half of them would be probably gone today. There's 16 who've been on the calendar for up to 9 weeks. That's a very short period of time in the United States Senate for people to have a chance to do their other business and get to know the nominees. There are 8 who've been on the calendar more than 9 weeks. And of the 8, 2 are being held up by Democrats. 2 more are Congressman Watt and Ms. Millett. That leaves 4, and one of those is a newscaster who's been nominated to be a member of the board of the Morris K. Udall Foundation, who's being moved along with other people to that foundation board. In other words, Madam President, it is not true that there are people being held up for a long period of time, because the only way you can be confirmed in the United States Senate is if the majority leader takes someone from this executive calendar, moves their nomination. It doesn't have to go through any sort of other motion. He can do it on his own, and then we move to consider that person. Well, you might say, but you can hold each one of those up. Yes, you can, under the cloture procedure. But let's take an example. Let's say Senator Reid, the distinguished majority leader, were to come under the old rules to the floor and say, I believe that Republicans are holding up 10 of our nominees in an obstructionist way. So let's say he arrives on Monday and he files cloture, he moves to confirm all 10 of those. Remember, he's the only one who can do that. He takes them off this calendar, he moves they be confirmed, and he files cloture on each of the 10 on Monday. Tuesday is what we call an intervening day. He can get the rest of them confirmed by banker's hours by Friday if he wants to, because after he has that intervening day, there can only be, because we changed the rules earlier this year, 4 hours of debate, and then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one. So you got 40 or 45 hours, you've got them all. So the majority leader, if he wished to, could confirm all of these people very easily unless 41 Republicans said no. But what we've already seen is that that almost never happens. In the history of the country, it's happened twice to President Obama on his sub-cabinet members, never on a cabinet member, never on twice on sub-cabinet members and never on district judges. So the majority leader had plenty of opportunity to have everybody confirm if he wanted to. This is why Senator Byrd, who was majority leader and minority leader, in his last speech to the Senate said, there's no need to change the rules, and I'm paraphrasing. I was at the Rules Committee hearing when he spoke. He said a majority leader can use the rules that we have, that was until today, to do whatever he wants to get done. So, and then there's the last charge, that the District of Columbia Circuit, let's go back, the District of Columbia Circuit, that was the other pretext for this. Somehow Republicans were doing something wrong by saying that it's too soon to cut off cloture, to cut off debate on the President's 3 nominees for the District of Columbia Circuit. No, put up Obamacare, the last one. District of Columbia Circuit. Madam President, Republicans were doing to the letter exactly what Democrats did in 2006 and 2007. They were saying that that court is underworked, that other courts are overworked, and we ought to move judges from where they're needed least to where they're needed most before we put any more judges on the court. This was a letter sent July 27, 2006, by all the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, including Leahy, Schumer, Feingold, Cole, Biden, Feinstein, Ted Kennedy. They said, quote, under no circumstances should President Bush's Republican nominee be considered, much less confirmed, by this committee before we address the very need for the judges on the committee. And all we in the Republicans Party were saying, Senator Grassley's had his bill in since 2001. The Democrats said in 2006 we shouldn't put any more judges on the court until we look at where the judges are needed. We're saying consider Senator Grassley's bill before you confirm the judges. And so that's the excuse. So the flimsiest of excuses. There's nothing to the idea that President Obama is not being treated at least as well as previous presidents with his nominees. The filibuster has not been used to deny him nominees except in 2 cases for sub-cabinet members and in the case of circuit judges no more than with President Bush. The majority leader has not used the rules that he had before him to easily confirm the people on the executive calendar, and those on the executive calendar for the most part have only been there for a few weeks. So why then did the majority feel the need to take this extraordinary action? And that takes us back to where we start. This is very simply, Madam President, another partisan political power grab to permit the majority to do whatever it wants to do anytime it wants to do it. The American people, millions of them, are filling out their insurance forms. They're trying to make the website work. They're terrified by the fact they may not have insurance by January 1. That's totally the result of a partisan political power grab in the middle of the night 3 years ago that put Obamacare into place. This is another example of that. The only cure for that is a referendum next November. Madam President, I deeply regret the action the Democrat majority took today. It is the most dangerous and the most consequential change in the rules of the United States Senate since Thomas Jefferson wrote those rules at the founding of our country. I ask unanimous consent to include in my remarks the letter from the Senate Democrats in 2006 arguing that the D.C. Circuit should have no more judges until we consider the proper number. I'd like to also ask consent to have the one-page list of the total number of sub-cabinet members who've ever been denied their seat by a failed cloture vote, and that number is 7 in the history of the Senate, 2 under President Obama, plus 5 Bush judges and 5 Obama judges. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Madam President, I want to echo at least some of the sentiment that my distinguished colleague from Tennessee just mentioned, that I'm disappointed in the use of the nuclear option. I oppose that, and I think that it could do permanent damage here to this institution and could have some very negative ramifications for our country and for the American people. I don't want to be an alarmist about it, but I do have concerns about it, and I'm very disappointed that it got to this point. And I want to talk about that in just a moment, but before I do, I'd like to say, you know, the Senate, if you step back, the Senate was designed to be a place for debate. It's where members, the way it's designed, the way the rules are structured, the size of it, the history of it, the members here can reach across the aisle and find solutions, and that's what this country needs right now. We need solutions. We need people who are willing to work together to get things done, and part of that is to allow the minority to speak, even if it's a minority of one. And you know, we need to protect that right, and we need to protect every senator's right to debate and to amend legislation. And I think no one here with a straight face would say that there haven't been abuses from time to time on that. We know that. There have been, and I've seen a lot since I've been here. But also, if you step back and you look at the Senate, it's really the only place in our government where the American people can actually see law being made. With all due respect to our colleagues in the House, you don't see law being made there. They come out of their Rules Committee and it's all pretty much set up, and they, right now at least, they just kind of tend to vote party line, party line, party line, done. You don't see law being made at the White House when they're doing things like executive orders. All you know is you kind of get the press release, or you see an announcement in the Rose Garden and that's it, or you don't see law even being made in the courts. A lot of law in this country is made by the courts, but for example, across the street here at the U.S. Supreme Court, what you see is you hear the arguments, and they all go back in chambers. You don't know really what they talk about. You don't really know how that's working. Then they come out with their decision, in some cases decisions, because a lot of times there's a dissent. But the United States Senate is unique in that way. We're the only place in our government where you can actually see the law being made, and it's also really, just in that same sense, it's the only place where the minority is guaranteed a voice. They sometimes get outvoted, but they're guaranteed at least to be heard, and I think that's important. So again, I share the disappointment with many of my colleagues today in how this happened. The Senate rules, I've worked with these rules for 11 years now. They can be arcane and frustrating. But the way it's designed is it allows people to fight for their state's interests or their ideological beliefs, whatever it happens to be. And the sense is that everybody's fighting for what's best for the country. We may disagree with what's best, and that's why we should have votes eventually on these matters. But it allows people to fight for what they think is right, best for their state, best for the country, best for the world, you know, whatever the issue happens to be. And since I've been here, what I've tried to do consistently is to fight to maintain the integrity of this institution. And so since I've been here, there have been numerous times when I've been part of bipartisan groups. Probably the most high-profile one was the Gang of 14 back in 2005, where we worked out some judicial nominations. But nonetheless, I was part of that. Just recently, the Levin McCain group that helped to change the rules, as the senator from Tennessee talked about. And really what that's all about, it's just about working with senators from both sides of the aisle to try to reach common sense solutions, not just to protect the rights of the minority, but also to improve the legislative process, to make sure this place works like it's designed. And so certainly that's what I'll try to do every single day when I come here, because I do understand that if you're going to get anything done in Washington, anything done in this Senate, you're going to have to work together to do it. It's like in the book of Isaiah, it says, "Come now, let us reason together." And I think that's the one verse in the whole Bible that sort of sums up the United States Senate. Come and let us reason together. And the Senate should always be the place for that. Let me make two last points on this nuclear option. First is, I would encourage the American citizens to be very, very careful in looking at statistics. They're difficult to use. They can be very misleading on this because almost always these statistics lack context. I hear the talking heads. I hear folks on talk radio. I've even seen people right here in this chamber use these extensively, and very often there's just no context. So sometimes, for example, if you just look at cloture petitions, you can actually have a filibuster without filing a cloture petition, and you can have a cloture petition without there actually being a filibuster. So again, that'll skew the numbers. Bottom line is there's plenty of blame to go around. Plenty of blame. If one person says it's all the other side's fault, they're not being truthful. There's plenty of blame to go around on this. Both parties are at fault. I'll give you just one example. It wasn't too long ago that I heard people come down here and say the D.C. Circuit workload was sufficient, that they needed more judges. Well, guess what? Now I heard those very same people say that the D.C. workload is so light, they don't need any more judges. Shoes on the other foot. Democrats back in the day said D.C. Circuit had a light workload, didn't need more judges. Now Democrats are saying it does need more judges. We need to stop the games and just get back to work. And I think there's one way to fix this, and that's by following the golden rule. I think if we take those words of Jesus literally and really apply those to what we do here in the Senate, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and like really mean that and really apply that, to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, I think all these problems would go away. It's about respecting one another. It's about working with one another. It's about respecting elections in other states and national elections. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all this would go away. Also, a little dose of forgive one another would also help. Madam President, let me also just spend a couple of minutes here thanking Chairwoman Mikulski. She has a tough job as chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and she's an example of someone who really is determined to work together to get things done, trying to get the appropriations process back on track. No doubt it's been sidetracked this year and in recent years. This year we've seen what I would term an irresponsible few, especially down on the House side, blowing up the Farm Bill, pushing for shutting down the government, trying to get us in a bad place on the debt ceiling, not trying to do the blame game. But I know that Chairwoman Mikulski is fighting very, very hard to put an end to that. And we need to get back to our number one priority. That should be growing our economy and creating jobs. There's lots of ways we can do that, but one of those ways is through the appropriation process by investing in infrastructure. We can make responsible, targeted investments in our future with the right kind of spending on infrastructure, whether it's roadways or airports or schools, our centers for innovation, whatever it happens to be. There's lots of smart ways to do that. And the history of this country shows that it is a winning strategy when we work together and make the right kind of investments in our future. And Arkansas is a good example. We have a number of things we could talk about today, different things that where federal spending has made a real difference in our state. One of those is called the Biomeda Water Project. It started back in 1923. It's been a subject of a lot of fights, and I have some scars to show that I've been part of some of those fights, but they're making great progress there. And not only is it good for thousands and thousands of farmers, but it's also great for drinking water and for flood control. And there's 55,000 acres of fish and wildlife habitat that's being protected through this project. So it's a win-win for everybody. Arkansas airports would be another example. In our state, You may not think of Arkansas as an aviation state or an aviation powerhouse. We have 29,000 jobs that are tied to commercial and general aviation. It's $2.5 billion in our economy. And again, that investment in infrastructure is what makes that possible. We also have the National Center for Toxicological Research down near Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Cutting-edge research, lots of effort on nanotechnology. We have a great technology park in Fayetteville. They're trying to build one in Little Rock. All of these things, and the focus on STEM, et cetera, all of these things help create jobs and grow our economy. And Congress needs to focus on that. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we need to work together. We need to pass a budget. We need to move our appropriation bills through the process. And we just need to, bottom line, get back on track. That's the way to move our economy forward, is by really putting the interests of our country first and not these partisan and sometimes petty disputes, ideological disputes. We really need to think about what's best long-term for the country. And again, I think the appropriations process is the way to do that. Madam President, with that, I'd say I will yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, it's my understanding we may have a vote this afternoon. I've often said the most important bill that we pass every year, and we've passed every year since for the last 52 years, and that's the National Defense Authorization Act. And I'd like to say this about the process we've gone through. I don't recall ever having worked with a chairman when I was a minority that is so easy to work with as Chairman Levin has been on this defense bill. It's one we all understand we got to do. It's got to be a reality. And a lot of the things we do around here, we could wait a month and do it, but on this we can't. Because right now we have men and women in the field. We have their paychecks held. We have things that have to happen to keep this going as it has in the last few years. Maintenance and modernization are right now. If we were not able to pass this now, our research and development would no longer be able to be there in time to take care of the immediate needs that we have. Now, I'm very upset with what's happened to our defense system. This administration, under this administration, we've lost $487 billion in defense, coming out of the height of defense. In addition to that, we are now looking at sequestration. And I will only say this maybe perhaps the last time, and that is, why should our defense system that is only accountable for 18% of the budget be responsible for 50% of the cuts? And it's because this administration has determined that's what's going to happen to the military. So now we have people like General Odierno, the commanding general of the United States Army, who said, and I quote, "Lowest readiness levels I've seen within our Army since I've been serving for the last 37 years, and that only 2 brigades are ready for combat." Admiral Greener, that's the CNO of the Navy, because of fiscal, quoting now, limitations and the situation we're in, we don't have another strike group trained and ready to respond to short notice in case of contingency. We're tapped out. And I think Admiral Winnefeld is the number 2 guy in the military system. He's the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he said, there could be, for the first time in my career, instances where we may be asked to respond to a crisis and we'll have to say we cannot. Well, I've given a lot of talks on the floor talking about how serious things are right now. I put the readiness chart up there. I would only comment to this. There's a lot of people who think there's an easier answer for this, and that we can, through efficiencies in the Pentagon, take care of these problems. A lot of work needs to be done. My junior senator certainly is going to be concentrating on that, on the efficiencies in there. However, if all the efficiencies were granted, that is only the blue line on this chart. This chart talks about sequestration. If nothing changes, what's going to happen to our military? So you have that. The next up there, the next large one, is force structure. We're talking about how many brigades, how many boots on the ground, how many ships, what it's going to look like. The next one up there is modernization. Modernization is a very small line, but here's the big one over here, and that is our ability to fight a war. That's our readiness. And if you look down here at the bottom, that's fiscal year 14, then 15, so you can see all of that's going to be gutted in the first 2 years if we don't make a change in it. I've tried to do that. I have amendments. I still have an amendment that is out there that could correct that situation. But I think it's important that people understand that it's the readiness that is going to be hurt more, and this is after $487 billion has been cut out of our defense system. I think General Amos, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, he testified under oath, and he talked about, he said, quote, "We will have fewer forces arriving less trained, arriving late in the fight. This would delay the buildup of combat power, allow enemy more time to build its defenses, and would likely prolong combat operations altogether. This is a formula for American casualties." It gets back to that orange line up there. Orange line is when you do that, you have to accept a greater risk. That means American lives. But I've already given that speech, and right now we're getting close to the time when we're going to actually be casting a vote. And I have, I think, kind of good news, and hopefully it's good news. I made a statement yesterday that the problem the Republicans have is with this, they have not been able to get amendments in. And we've gone through this in years past, and always something has broken loose where we're able to have amendments. Well, up until yesterday, the Republicans had 81 amendments that we wanted to be considered. Frankly, that's not all that uncontrollable. That could have been done. We could still have gotten through that this week. But as it is right now, and the good news is, I had said yesterday on the floor that I was going to come in and try to work all night long, and the staff has done this, to come up with 25 amendments and say if we, the Republicans, can have 25 amendments to be considered, they can be voted down, but they just to be considered on the floor, that we would be receptive to having the results. And let's put it the other. And here's the interesting thing about it. We've heard a lot of people talking about, well, why does all of a sudden this has to be done in 5 days? And yet we've been sitting around here for 3 months when we could have been considering it. And I'd like to suggest, if you look at this, this is every year how many days it's taken of consideration, and it's always more than what we have for the rest of this week. I only say that because in spite of that, we still have a way of doing it. Put the other chart up. And for those who might think that the recorded votes that we're requesting, or the votes that we're requesting, it's not going to be that many votes. We're asking for 25, the Republican side. Democrats have 25, that's 50. But if you look at years past, for example, last year, we had a total of amendments offered, 106, but only 34 were voice voted, only 8 required a recorded vote. I can go back to all the rest of the years that are on this chart, but the bottom line is this. What I'm asking for today is 25 for the Republicans, 25 for the Democrats. Of those, not more than 15 to 20 would require votes. We could do that in 1 day. So it can be done. We could finish this and still give Republicans the opportunity to have their votes. So what I've got here is a list of the 25 amendments that we're asking for. Again, I'm not even for all 25 of them, but they should all be considered. One way or another, probably would end up requiring maybe at the most 10 votes. So I'm offering these amendments and telling the majority. And by the way, I've already talked about what the great relationship is that we have had, that I've had during this consideration as a ranking member of the Armed Services with the Chairman Carl Levin. So I'm offering to Carl Levin and to the Democrats, the majority in the Senate and the majority on this committee, these 25 amendments. All we're asking for is for those 25 to be considered, and we can do this bill right the way we've done it for 52 years, and we can have a bill, we can have it by the end of this week. So I am offering that, and I also announced yesterday that in the event that I can come up with a total number of 25 that our caucus would agree with, that if we could do that and we're refused, when the time comes, I will vote against going to the bill, and I think that very likely could happen this afternoon. However, if they accept them, I am committing right here on the floor that I will be in full support and I will vote for it. And I want people to understand, in the unlikely event that the majority does not accept the consideration of these 25 votes, that I will be voting against cloture on the bill when that vote comes up. With that, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I'm not on the Armed Services Committee, although I was 38 years ago. But I would think that